So good morning to all of those who join us from Brazil, and good afternoon to all of you in the UK. We are lucky to have with us today two specialists from the banking sector who work with Brazil and who will be discussing how innovative projects such as open banking, as well as the new foreign exchange law, which is in its final stage of approval, will impact the business and the regulatory environments in Brazil, foster competition, and open the country for new investment opportunities. In short, there is a digital transformation taking place in the Brazilian banking system, and we will hear about that today from our speakers. So our speakers are Simon Davies. Simon has set up and managed regulated financial institutions in Latin America and Europe during the last 25 years, and has been serving as managing director of the leading Latin America FinTech, EBANX, since 2017. EBANX is currently operating in various countries in Latin America, such as Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, Chile, amongst many others. In this May, EBANX has announced the launch of EBANX One, which marks the start of a revolution, as now one company can handle all types of payment into and out of Brazil, and 14 other Latin American markets too. And I hope we will hear a lot more about that. We also are very pleased to have with us today Pedro Eroles, a partner at the banking and financial service practice at Mattos Filho Advogados, a leading Brazilian law firm. Pedro has extensive experience in financial services and payments regulations, financial transactions, FinTechs, cryptocurrencies, and transactions involving regulated entities at the Central Bank of Brazil and the Exchange Commission. So on the theme of our seminar today, open banking, as we know, is an initiative that allows customers to log into one website or open an app on their phone and see all of their accounts, their current accounts, credit cards, and savings in one place. There is a lot more about that, and we will hear later from the specialists. But regulations applying to open banking and FinTechs are relatively new in the UK, in the European Union, and in Brazil, but yet they are coming at a steady pace. In Brazil, as in other markets, the central bank has issued rules in connection with open banking with a view to increasing competition amongst banks and offering better products and services to customers, as well as in order to attract new players and foster competition in the sector. So what has been happening there in this respect? How will this impact the financial market? Specifically, what will open banking mean to FinTechs and investors in FinTechs? We will be discussing this today. And last but not least, we presently have a long-awaited new foreign exchange law, which is in its final stage of approval, which should tackle former hurdles for investments in the country. And anyone who has dealt with Brazilian foreign exchange rules, I am sure looks forward to that, and that we will be hearing about this new law as well. So before we start, a few rules on housekeeping, and they are the following. Please keep your microphone muted and camera switched off. There will be no Q&A session today, but instead the format of the seminar will be a little bit different from what we normally do here at the Brazilian Chamber. I will be asking questions to Pedro and Simon, and you will also be able to ask your questions during the whole webinar via the Teams chat box. So please feel free to type your questions and send them to us. Also, please note that this webinar is being recorded, and that the recording of this session will be posted at the Chamber's YouTube channel and website in the next few days. So you can always catch up with what is going to be said here today. And if you do not want to appear in the recording, please make sure that your camera is switched off during the whole webinar. So finally, with that, I think that we are able to start. And I will start with a question to both our speakers, first to be answered by Pedro and then on by Simon. And the question is how the regulatory and business environments used to be in Brazil in the recent past, and what were the main hurdles for investments in the country? Pedro.
Thank you, Vera. Thank you, Simon. Thank for all those who are watching us today. And your question, Vera, is very interesting, because we had in the recent past in Brazil a very different environment for investment and for entrance of new entities in the payments and financial sectors in Brazil. So basically, if we back to the 90s in Brazil, we had two resolutions issued by our National Monetary Council that allowed banks to be constituted as multiple service banks. So basically, this was the first landmark that started the concentration of our financial sector in Brazil. So basically, we had in the past a lot of small banks in Brazil operating in very specific activities, and then we started to have mergers and constitution of bigger banks in Brazil. Later, still in the 90s, we had two programs led by the government of the former president of Brazil, Fernando Henrique Cardoso, which aimed at strengthen the financial sector in Brazil. So basically, we had a lot of banks in Brazil that were not sound and operating in activities that were not exactly activities that would be indicated as the more sound operations in the financial sector. So basically, we had, just to give an example, we had by that time a lot of public banks, state banks in Brazil that used to make financial operations with the government, with governors and the public authorities to lend their activities. So basically, we have a lot of unsound banks in Brazil, and those two programs led by the Brazilian government led to a lot of mergers and consolidation of the financial institutions in Brazil. This addressed the problem that we had in Brazil related to unsound banks, so undercapitalized banks. But on the other hand, it created more concentration in the sector. So basically, when in the recent past, we had most part of the financial assets in Brazil held by the five bigger financial institutions, financial conglomerates in Brazil. So basically 80% of the assets were held by those banks. In addition to that, we had a barrier for entrance in the financial sector, which we have an internal barrier because to operate in the retail, it was necessary to have branches around all the country. So basically, Brazil is a very big country, and to operate in the retail, it's very expensive. So we have this internal barrier, and also we used to have a barrier for foreign institutions that intended to operate in Brazil. in the past, for a foreign financial institution to incorporate a bank or to have a stake in a financial institution in Brazil, it was necessary to obtain an approval from the president of Brazil. So basically, it was almost impossible to for a foreign financial institution to operate in Brazil. So in the financial sector, you used to have all these barriers for entrance and for the competition in the sector. In the payment sector, we had a scenario that was not much different. Basically, in the payment sector, we had two card schemes, and two acquirers concentrating most part of the payment transactions in Brazil, with a lot of barriers for entrance too. So basically, in the recent past, we had a lot of hurdles, a lot of barriers for entrance in the financial sector and also in the payment sector in the country.
Thank you very much, Pedro. Simon, would you like to comment?
Yeah, thank you, Vera, and welcome to everybody who's joined us for this enlightening webinar. I certainly hope that we live up to your expectations. Yeah, so I went to Brazil initially in 1996, and exactly as you said, Pedro, I was busily setting up a bank, and the bank had to be, this was, I was working with the manufacturer Volvo, and the reason we needed a bank was to provide simple asset management on the sale of our assets and also to provide treasury functions. However, we had to set up a multiple bank in order to provide a limited number of functions. And as you rightly pointed out, as an external investor, although one embraced by Brazil in that the investments Volvo had made were substantial in the country, we had the very complex issue of having local shareholders and managing the business as we wanted to with the local shareholder involvement and investment, and ultimately it was a complex exercise, extremely complex in the time it took to set up the bank and the different governance structures that we had to go through. So yeah, and I went through all that business as well of the that you talked about. It was bringing back memories of the undercapitalized banks and the consolidation process that went on, which left Brazil with basically the 5 very strong banks. And these 5 very strong banks, strong in terms of market share in all cases, and in a couple of cases very well capitalized as well. These banks provided a level of service to the majority of Brazilians. But one has to say some of those services were expensive. Some of those services weren't particularly innovative. And they left an opportunity. And the opportunity is what we call the underbanked. They're people who have bank accounts, but they just need more services. And EBANX was set up in 2012, and I'm not going to talk about purely EBANX. Of course, there was Banco Inter as well, and there's a new bank as well, C6. A number of institutions were set up around the same time, seeking to provide a range and level of service to Brazilians that had not been entirely overlooked, but just didn't have choice. I think the key word is choice. And I'm going to concentrate a little bit on that because it's quite a journey. So in 2012, EBANX was set up. Initially, our idea was to provide a range of payment services for e-commerce merchants. So this enabled us to put Brazilians in touch with e-commerce merchants and to overcome some of the difficulties involved in making an international payment in Brazilian reais. So that concept, essentially, we've been operating very much in a grey area. I say grey because the legislation wasn't clear. And as an innovator, we've been challenging the central bank. We've been challenging the established processes and practices in order to bring about a range of services. And it's been quite an interesting process. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the central bank has sat up, taken notice, and appreciate that there is a lot to be done in order to provide these services. So I think that the important issue is that now the first steps have been taken essentially in order to clarify what is going on in the sector, in order to provide a level of service to the underbanked, in order to provide choice to Brazilians and Brazilian citizens, in order to provide transparency and remove the complexity in terms of setting up a financial institution or a payment service provider or generally a FinTech type of entity, in order to provide choice to Brazilians. And I think that is very innovative. And we will go on to talk about some of the things that have been done specifically. But by way of an introduction, we've gone from the situation where, to do anything in the country, you had to have a multiple bank with all the complexities involved, even if you only wanted to do very, limited amount of business-to-business lending. And then we're now in a situation where, due to a number of innovators, a number of those who were prepared to challenge the status quo, and I've always been very impressed by Brazilians and their ability to innovate and be creative. We're now in a situation where the central bank has recognized this, and there are all sorts of exciting things happening in the market. Thank you.
Thank you very much to both of you, and it's clear that changes have taken place. And as Simon said, we will be talking more about that. I do have here a question from someone in our audience, and I will come to that, but after the second question, because I think that it's better placed than now. So you have spoken, as it was in the past, you have spoken about what the expectations were. So can I ask what has changed in the recent years? How are the regulatory and business environments for entrance to the financial and payment sector in Brazil? And what has been the role of the regulator in this regard? Pedro, could you please comment? And then Simon, thank you.
Sure. Well, the changes are drastic. So basically, I mentioned that we had two general barriers if we were thinking about the barriers for entrance in the financial and payment sectors in Brazil. Basically, the domestic barrier, because it was very expensive to operate in the retail in Brazil, and also the external, so to speak, barrier that it was necessary a decree from the president of Brazil for financial institutions constituted abroad to invest in Brazil. Basically, those two barriers have fallen. The domestic barrier, this cost to operate in the retail, was circumvented by the fact that now with the digitization, your bank is in your mobile, and this is a fact in Brazil. Also, during the government of the former president Fernando Henrique Cardoso, we had the privatization of our telephone sector, and it allowed the expansion of the use of mobiles and the use of internet to the Brazilian population. So basically, this allowed also that the financial services could be performed and rendered by the Brazilian population by the internet, by digital means. And also the decree, the need of a decree from the president of Brazil has also fallen because we have the issuance, a recent issuance of a general decree stating the interest of the Brazilian government of a foreign investment in financial sector in Brazil. So basically the changes were drastic, and allowed to that we had also something that was very, very positive to foster the competition in those sectors in Brazil, which is a kind of alliance between the regulator and the private sector in the best way possible. So basically, the central bank leading projects to foster competition and to foster innovation in the financial sector in Brazil. So basically, we can point out 5 major projects led by the central bank. The open banking ecosystem, the real-time payments, which was named PIX in 2020, the registration of card scheme receivables, the regulatory sandbox, and also the FX law, the bill of law to modernize the FX regulation in Brazil. So as to the first 4 projects that I mentioned, they have already been implemented or are in course of implementation. The open banking ecosystem has been initiated in 2019 with an announcement from the central bank with the major guidelines for its implementation in Brazil, and now it's in course of implementation this year in Brazil. Real-time payments has already been implemented in Brazil, and it has already surpassed the most part of the most used payment means in Brazil. So it has been a huge success in Brazil to foster the use of electronic payment means in the country. Regulatory sandbox has also been initiated in Brazil. So the idea is that players that intend to create new business models that do so with under the supervision of the central bank, and also the registration of card scheme receivables in Brazil, which allows small merchants that that only have or have as main collateral to their credit operations their own receivables from its sales, to register those receivables and to use those receivables to find more credit sources in the financial market in Brazil. And finally, we have the bill of law that's currently under discussion in the Brazilian Congress that intend to modernize our FX regulation, which is very old. Basically, our FX regulation began to be implemented and constituted in the 20s of the last century. So it's a very old, very cumbersome, very it's very difficult to interpret and to operate regulation as to the FX markets in Brazil, which poses a lot of difficulties and a lot of hurdles for foreign investment in the country. So basically, we had drastic changes in the regulatory environment in Brazil, and also a very positive and very active role of the central bank in order to foster innovation and foster competition in those sectors in Brazil.
Thank you very much, Pedro. Simon, could you please comment?
Yeah, I'm going to go back a little bit further, actually, because there's a bit of a gap between the 90s and what's happening currently. So Brazil's not alone in introducing these concepts. In 2008, there was what we call the GFC, the global financial crisis, triggered by all these asset-backed insurance underwritten loans in the States. Extraordinarily complex issue. But what it did was that it brought regulators to realize the dangers involved in huge banking organizations controlling large tranches of the economy when everything goes terribly wrong and they fail. There was a concentration of prudential risk in a limited number of financial institutions. Now, we saw that in the UK. We saw that in the UK with Royal Bank of Scotland, Bank of Scotland. Ironically, the Scottish are very good at looking after money, but not on this occasion. Then we saw it in the United States. There was Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers. There was a danger of collapse of the global financial system. Governments intervened, and at great expense ensured that the system was reduced to a degree of stability. And then set about introducing new regulatory controls. And the thing that they really did was to introduce the concept of open banking, whereby there was they could more easily introduce competition into these markets. They could also segregate banks so that they didn't absolutely cover everything. They would be more specialist. And of course, in doing that, they provided the opportunity for specialists to open into the market. So that's the sort of thing that happened as a result of the global financial crisis. And it happened throughout the world. And it didn't happen overnight as well. This took a long time. They introduced different legislation, regulatory oversight, the attitude, and the emphasis all along was to encourage innovation, encourage competition, to reduce costs, specifically to increase efficiency, and especially to increase inclusivity, as we call it, whereby underbanked or people who didn't have a range of services or who felt that they were not catered for adequately in the financial system were catered for. And that's where companies such as us saw the opportunity in the inclusivity, because there are large numbers of people out there, and especially in countries like Brazil and other Latin American countries where you've got growing middle class, you've got large number of women entering the workplace, and as they enter the workplace, obviously they have disposable income. You have growing economies, you have diverse economies, you have a requirement for service industries, moving away from traditional manufacturing industries or dependence on commodities, and all of this fired this move towards open banking, whereby regulators realized that the opportunity was there in order to provide opportunities for inclusivity and fairness and competition. And obviously, speaking specifically of Brazil, big five banks controlling everything. When I say everything, almost everything, and consequently, the regulator realized that this is a prudential risk, and consequently, there is an opportunity to open the market up. But in Brazil, doing it in a very carefully controlled way, with the regulator spending a lot of time getting it right, because I do think that as they've started the process with things like PICs, for example, the new legislation regarding open banking, it looks like they've largely got it right. And so I'm very enthusiastic about what we're seeing. We're seeing the growth of new bank, the growth of EBANX. There are almost 1,200 FinTech institutions currently in Brazil alone. Obviously, there are some very small ones, and there are some that won't go very far, but there are an awful lot in there as well that will go a long way. And they're all benefiting from this this change in regulatory approach initiated by the Central Bank of Brazil.
Well,
Well,
very
just
interesting to
to
hear.
add a comment
Yeah, sure.
here as to open banking in Brazil, maybe it is addressing another barrier, which is the barrier of information. So basically, when you mention the five big conglomerates, and that some barriers have been circumvented, but this barrier of information, so basically the concentration of clients also entails the concentration of the information and the data of those clients, which imposes also a barrier for new entrants. So basically, open banking with the intention to create an infrastructure in which all those data, all these data will flow without barriers between incumbents and entrants, will create also an environment in which the clients will have the possibility to choose the best institution based on the best conditions for the services rendered, and not based on the information database that this entity already has of those clients. So this is very important with respect to open banking in Brazil.
It's a very important point, Pedro, and thank you for bringing it up. And indeed, that data, rather than it just being allowed into, has to be controlled as well. And as you know, there is the LGPD, the Lei Geral de Proteção dos Dados, GDPR in the UK and the European Union. But that data, personal data, pertinent and confidential data, in many cases, needs to be carefully controlled as well, or carefully protected. And so it is very important that there is access to this data, and it isn't controlled by just one bank. But at the same time, it needs to be looked after and treated respectfully, which is why we also have the accompanying LGPD legislation in order to protect its use and application.
And it was very interesting to hear you both, and the evolution from the financial crisis of 2008 and how this led to the creation of the concept of open banking, which today is so important in Brazil, in the UK, in the European Union. And we do have a question about that. And the question comes from Ieda Gomes. Ieda is a member of the board of the Brazilian Chamber. And Ieda asks, the open bank proposition relies on pulverized low-income consumers with a high default risk. What mechanism do they have in place to mitigate that risk?
I'm quite happy to take that one.
Yes, please.
I've spent many years in the lending industry. It seems to me that this is a lending question. And I don't know exactly the answer to it. The conundrum that all of us have in the world of inclusivity is providing credit and lending to those who don't have the financial wherewithal in order to repay their obligations. Now, I think that what we're endeavoring to do in the world of fintech and inclusivity is to provide access to financial systems for those involved, those who haven't necessarily benefited in the past, enabling them to build up a credit history, enabling them to establish credibility in the sector, so that they are able to access a range of tools, one of which may be consumer loans or loans for purchases of your household or whatever. So Brazil has been pretty good in terms of providing loans to lower income individuals, providing you have a bank account, providing you have at least a local credit card. There are mechanisms whereby you can pass along, your purchases. It is a conundrum for everyone involved in the lending industry, whether or in the banking industry, how to provide credit to those who may not have the means to repay their obligations, or they get into worse and worse lending situations, and ultimately their loans build up and they find themselves at risk of default. I think that what we're trying to do in the world of fintech is to certainly bring a common sense approach to this. And I noticed in the chat that you brought in your second question related to the appointment of a popular singer to the board of Nubank. And I think that there is...
Yes, I do have this question. Would you like to read it?
Yeah, well, shall I read it out? I'll just carry on. Shall I, Vera, if that's...
Why don't you? Yeah, you can carry on. When you finish, I will read it. And then maybe Pedro would like to comment, and you may want to comment on this as well. Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so please carry on.
Okay. On governance in June, the invitation of a controversial but popular singer to join the board of Nubank attracted lots of positive and negative feedback. Don't banks need to have their board members vetted by regulators? The answer is yes. All banks have to have their board members vetted by regulators, and indeed there's quite a complex process involved in the appointment of members of the board. In this particular case, what Nubank are trying to do is to break away from the established concept of bankers out of touch with the world of ordinary people. And in that way, by appointing such a person to the board, they are hoping that they are indicating that they are in touch with ordinary people, their needs and their issues, and consequently they can construct products that address those needs and those issues. And I think that that's the answer to to both parts of the question, Ada. We don't know the answer, but what we're trying to do is actually approach a pragmatic. We have a pragmatic approach whereby we can actually listen to people and find solutions that work.
Very good, Pedro. Do you have the second question on your screen, or
Yes.
shall I read it to you? Yeah. Would you like to comment on this as well?
Yes. Seemed to me, I totally agree. It seemed to me that the appointment of Anita as to the board of directors of Nubank, it was a kind of symbolic appointment in the sense that they intend to address their products to the population in general, and I think it has a very symbolic character to the appointment of a popular singer, someone that has all this popularity with the population in general. So that was that. And personally, I think it was great.
Okay,
very
good. Thank you both. So we move on with our seminar, and my next question is, what can we expect for the future? Will Brazil continue to open new opportunities for investment in its financial and payment sectors? Pedro, would you like to comment, please?
In my view, yes, for sure. I think those projects led by the central bank will continue to progress, it will be enhanced. So basically, we had an announcement from the central bank recently about the international real-time payments, the international PIX. So basically, if we think about the new FX law that is being discussed in the Congress, and also this new modernized structure for payments in Brazil, we can think about in a much more modern way of payments in Brazil. Also in the financial sector, because the open banking ecosystem is currently in its course of implementation, but we cannot notice all the effects that are expected yet. So basically, it will be noted in the coming years. And what we can expect is that probably we have a much more open and competitive financial sector in Brazil. It tends with more competition. The consequences are lower costs and lower costs and also and with lower costs those products will become much more widespread among the population, bring financial inclusion to the Brazilian population in general. So those underbanked, which were in fact in a recent past excluded from the financial and payment sectors in Brazil, will be probably addressed by those projects, bringing opportunities for a lot of opportunities for investment in Brazil.
Simon, would you like to comment, please?
Yeah, right. So I think Pedro referred earlier to a number of things like the card scheme receivables and the treatment of card scheme receivables, the sandbox, and FX. All of us know that there's a number of issues that I'll address on each of them, and I'll start off talking about PIX. So PIX is a fabulous tool. The way that it has been introduced under the control of the central bank, it's been well thought out, well tried and tested before it was launched. And it is open not only to the S1s and the S2s of the Brazilian banking world, the big banks and the biggish banks, but also to payment services providers. Payment information services providers is a new category that's catered for as well. And you can join as a direct or an indirect participant, which opens it up to a whole bunch of agency arrangements as well. So that's fabulous. It works really well. I mean, we all know about docs and TEDs and all the complications and the limits and, you know, how quickly the payments go and stuff. I mean, not a bad system, but a little bit restrictive. PIX, instantaneous. Costs are really very low as well. And the great thing is all the innovations that are coming on with PIX. So there's a whole agenda of there's PIX Cobrança coming along with it, or it should actually be just about being launched with the QR codes used for payments. The abilities with PIX SAC and PIX Troco, which should facilitate withdrawals. There's also, they're looking at Bluetooth connectivity, so there's going to be PIX by approximation. So you'll be able to do those sort of instant payments where you wave your card or your smartphone. And I think, you know, make payments, PIX offline. All these things are going to be challenging some of the established. So, for example, we talked about the card schemes. Card schemes have a lot of control, a lot of cost is added on into that process. Nothing against the card schemes, but PIX is a very viable alternative, and consequently, it's going to make everything more competitive, more inclusive. So that's a great thing. The sandbox and the attitude. We're here in the UK, where we're regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. They have a sandbox. The sandbox is a fantastic thing. Rather than turning up at the regulator and saying we want to do this, and they say, "Good Lord, you cannot do that. That's not allowed. Undermine the whole financial system. Go away." What they do is you work with the regulator. You come up with an idea. You sit down with them. You explain what you're trying to do, and you work with the regulator in order to provide a solution that addresses a problem in the financial system. So the sandbox is a great thing, and it will lead to further innovation. WhatsApp Pay, that's around as well, already launched. I think it was great that the central bank stopped it because it was not fit for purpose. They had then to address a number of issues, and it's since been relaunched, and it is now fit for purpose. So WhatsApp Pay is, there are going to be other solutions as well coming along. And then FX, if anything needs, yeah, the whole convertibility issue of the Brazilian real needs to be addressed. If that is addressed adequately, that will revolutionize the world in which we're working. It will change our business model. Personally, at EBANX will change quite considerably, but it is certainly a very innovative. So we're going to see more and more innovations. And the point that Pedro said, and the point that I have in my own experience, so Brazil wasn't a particularly open market 25 years ago when I rocked up there back in 1996. It is a far more open market now. Yes, there are some issues with regard to language, for example. It's a huge country and everybody speaks Portuguese. More and more of the young people speak very good English, and there's that lingua franca that we can all communicate with. So that's great. It does help communication. The legal system, people like Pedro are here in order to facilitate this passage through the legal system, because it is complex. It is based on Roman law and not necessarily on common law. So there are different issues that one needs to understand. So the whole thing is becoming far more investor friendly, far better for the future. And I know certainly, as somebody with a hat very firmly in both camps, in Brazil and the UK, I would certainly like to see a lot more UK investment in Brazil, because in my experience, it's a wonderful country in terms of opportunities and rewards. And hopefully activities such as this will encourage more and more people to consider Brazil as an investment opportunity, and certainly in the world of fintech, where there's all sorts of very worthwhile legislation opening up the market and making it accessible and inclusive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes,
just to add a comment here, Vera, it's about the real-time payments in Brazil, the PIX system in Brazil. It's absolutely amazing for me that the central bank led all the process, because it's somehow counterintuitive, because you tend to think that the private sector would lead the innovation in the financial sector, and the regulator would pose hurdles for those innovations. But it was the contrary. Basically, the private sector in Brazil and the incumbents were very accommodated with the usual payment means that Simon mentioned, DOCs, TEDs. So basically, we have not the expectation of change of this old payment methods until the central bank took the lead to implement PIX in Brazil. So it's absolutely amazing for me, and it's in line that with what I've mentioned, that the central bank is aligned with the private sector to foster competition, to foster innovation, and to foster investments in the sector in Brazil.
I understand
Excellent.
well, Pedro, that PIX International is on the way as well, and that will be really even more phenomenal. For sure.
Very, very good. Thank you very much to you both, and good prospects for the future with these new regulations to foster competition, to encourage it. Very welcome. But we have here a very important question from Tanya Dratcourt from the Financial Conduct Authority, and that is, what steps will be taken to mitigate money laundering and financial crime risks?
Can I answer that?
Please.
Tanya, as somebody who has run regulated institutions and is currently responsible for regulated institutions in both countries, let me reassure you about our AML and financial crime policies and approaches. So companies such as EBANX, for example, we're at the cutting edge of utilizing digitally driven AML solutions at the KYC process. So as we go through our onboarding process of our merchants, or indeed our end users, we utilize the global tools that everybody else is utilizing in terms of accessing financial information to safeguard against sanctions, politically exposed persons, etc. The same controls that we have in the UK, they have in Brazil, and indeed counterterrorism financing as well. The legislative environment and the regulatory environment of the central bank in Brazil is remarkably similar to that in the UK. On transaction monitoring, EBANX as a group, we use a UK product provided by one of the leading providers of transaction monitoring software as well. So the controls are there, and they are rigorously enforced, having suffered audits under the Central Bank of Brazil. They're also rigorously enforced by the regulator. And I think, in my personal experience, there's a very good level of control. One of the issues that we have, being a Brazilian company operating on a global basis, is credibility. There's always this issue from Latin America. How far away is that from Colombia, and all sorts of other things. The general level of unfortunately misinformation that goes on. So we work very hard in terms of credibility and ensuring that we have the very best global tools so that we can actually manage those risks, as well as any other country and any other company in any other country in our sector. So hopefully you're reassured by that.
So this, just to add a comment, it's a very interesting question, and just to add a comment to what Simon just said. If you think about the open banking ecosystem in Brazil, it is a project, as we mentioned, to foster competition. But on the other hand, it's only open for authorized institutions. So only authorized institutions, authorized by the central bank, can join the open banking ecosystem. And the authorized institutions need to comply with very strict rules regarding AML in Brazil. So basically, the central bank is leading this opening process, this fostering competition in the sector, but also maintaining the concern with the security and with the soundness of the financial and the payment sectors in the country.
Thank you very much to both of you. I think that we may have time for one more question, and that is how do you think that the projects of open banking, PIX, and the new foreign exchange law may converge in the future? Pedro, would you like to have a go at this one?
Yeah, I can start. I think they convert in the purpose to foster competition, foster this opening of the sectors in Brazil, to foster investments in those sectors. But they also convert specifically. If you think about the PIX, the real-time payments, it's operating in Brazil only domestically, only for domestic payment transactions. And the new FX law that's been discussed in the Brazilian Congress, so probably it will converge in the future to create international PIX, the international real-time payments in the country. Basically, when we think about the open bank, we have also a part of the open banking ecosystem that addresses the payment transactions. So basically, when we think about the possibility of a customer using a payment initiator to initiate its payments in any account that that this customer holds in any financial or payment institution, it will be enabled by the open banking ecosystem. So I think if you think about this international payments and this consolidation on just an app of a payment initiation service provider, we can think about one possibility of convergence of the PIX, open banking, and the new FX law, but others may come.
Wonderful. Okay, so can I please ask you both to finalize with a message for the future, and also Simon, of course, you are here based in the UK. Maybe you would like to add some comments in relation to developments here in the UK on open banking and in Brazil, but what to expect to the future. I know we have discussed this throughout, but as a final message in our seminar before we come to an end of what has been a very interesting and enlightening discussion. Simon, would you like to start, please?
Yeah, of course. Thank you. And thank you very much for the opportunity to present and discuss this fascinating subject with everyone. It is a subject that's very close to my heart on a personal and a professional basis. Right. So the world of Brazil that I arrived in 25 years ago is obviously totally different today from that of today. What we're seeing is from a global 25 years ago, and Pedro referenced Fernando Henrique Cardoso, who was a very successful Brazilian president in many ways. He brought about some changes in the Brazilian system, which were okay, but there was still a fairly protected market. What we're seeing now is the opening up of the market in a controlled, credible way, overseen by a credible regulator, and a huge market for investment and opportunity. Some 220 million people. As I mentioned earlier, this growing middle class, disposable income levels, etc. If you're looking for a country in which to spread the word, and bearing in mind that I do work for one of Brazil's largest FinTechs, and we don't necessarily want the competition, but it is turning into a great market for investment, and a great market for opportunity. And if you're based in the UK, do think very much about it. It's a friendly market in many, many ways, not just the people who are extremely friendly and have always been very, very friendly and welcoming to myself, but also in terms of the changes in the legislation, the regulatory environment. If you want to do things properly, you'll be very welcomed, and it's a great market and a good opportunity. So do think about it, please, from an investment point of view. And there are people such as Pedro who are here in order to assist you with entry into that market. And thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Simon. Pedro.
Thank you, Vera. First of all, I'd like to thank the Chamber for the opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here. It's an honor to share this panel with Simon and with you, Vera, to discuss this very interesting topic. So my message here is that Brazil is as Simon mentioned, it's a very different Brazil from 20 years ago. So we have a very positive environment for FinTechs, a very positive regulatory environment for investments, and for the creation of new business models, for innovative business models in the financial and payment sectors in the country. So I think basically is that I think those changes will be enhanced in the future. This opening of the sectors will be enhanced. It will continue in the coming years. So it's been great to follow those changes here in Brazil, and I think a lot of opportunities will be opened in the future.
Well, that's great. It is me, in the name of the Brazilian Chamber, that now would like to thank you both for this discussion today. It's a fascinating topic, and really it is. And we are lucky to have two experts on this to talk to us. As a final message to our members, I would like to say to you that during the last 1.5 years, basically, all of our activities have been conducted this way. We have had webinars about interesting topics, always to keep the discussions about Brazil going on, because of course we could not have the presential events that have always been at the core of the Brazilian Chamber. But this has also enabled us perhaps to bring information to members and to people that were not so close. So it has been, I think, a very positive experience to us. But what I would like to say today, and first of all, to encourage you, if you're not a member, to join the Brazilian Chamber, and also to say that we are going to have our first presential event on the 22nd of September. And we have already sent a save the date, and all going well, which of course I hope things will continue. Well, not continue, but things will go well and until then. And we will all be able to meet again. So I look forward very much to seeing you all on the 22nd of September, if this is still, of course, permissible. So thanks very much, everyone, for joining us. Again, a big thank you to Pedro and to Simon, and see you soon. And I hope we can maybe do another one of these webinars with you, because it was really very good. Thank you very much.
It'll be my
Bye-bye
pleasure.
now.
Thank you. Thank you.